So now we're going to transition to the next part of the morning's agenda, and the panel focusing on who will continue to pull the thread on things that I said. Transformation in Contact Sustainment, or TIC-S, which is no small matter in today's rapidly changing military landscape. This theme hits at the core challenges we face in maintaining the operational readiness and effectiveness of our forces. So we've got a great lineup on the panel, and I want to say thanks to my friend, one of my mentors, Lieutenant General Retired Donnie Walker, true expert leader in the field. You're also going to hear from Major General Michelle Donahue, the Commanding General of Combined Arms Support Command. As we face the realities of modern warfare and logistics, Michelle's team, she's going to help us explore the fundamental principles surrounding this part. And her insights will be invaluable as she discusses the strategic designs that we will implement to enhance our operational readiness. Next up, Chris Johnson, Colonel Chris Johnson, commander of the 25th Infantry Division Sustainment Brigade. Chris is one of our leaders in the field that is actually doing TIC. And so he's got unique insights of the real world impacts of some of the things that we're doing across the Army. Next up, Shane Upton. Brigadier General Shane Upton is the director of the Contested Logistics Cross-Functional Team. With the ever-increasing complexities of warfare today, he will discuss emerging requirements essential to our industry partners and things that we're currently testing that we plan to bring to the battlefield in the future. We also got a couple of great industry partners. Mr. Aaron Jaffe, Palantir Senior Vice President of Supply Chain and Logistics and a wonderful partner of ours in the Army Material Command, and Major General Retired Pete Johnson from GM Defense, who will share what our Army needs to do from their unique perspectives. It is essential to remember that effective transformation requires shared understanding between us and our industry partners, and we're thrilled to have them join the panel today. And so with that, I'm going to stop talking and turn this thing over to General Walker. So Donnie, you're net. Thank you very much.
All right. So Chris, I really appreciate it. General Mohan, we go way back, and it's good to be back in Huntsville. And I appreciate the AMC team and AUSA asking me to moderate this very important panel today. It's probably been about 2 years since I've been back. It's great. General Mohan kind of opened his comments up talking about the great leadership and the great community here in Huntsville. They do a tremendous job putting us on every year. Great teammates, and I echo all of his comments that he made. General Mohan also talked earlier about in his keynote comments about Transformation in Contact Sustainment, the title of our panel today, and what we'll focus on. And it's simply what the sustainment enterprise is doing to drive continuous transformation in order to sustain and deliver combat-ready forces. And he gave you countless examples, which my teammates up here will expand on as we go on. They'll also share some of the lessons learned from TIC 1.0, as well as Ukraine, both from a positive aspect, the positive lessons that we've learned, as well as things that we need to work on as we go forward. Once again, I think AUSA got it exactly right, kind of how they set things up for these days that we're going through here on this conference. And what I mean by that is because I think today's panel is an excellent follow-up to yesterday's CMF panels where we talked about TIC and the future starting today. Excellent panel. I had a chance to sit in on that, as well as Agile Acquisition for Continuous Transformation, which one of my mentors, General Larry Weish, headed that panel up. And what a lineup we have this morning. General Mohan kind of gave you their duty positions. But I'll tell you that I have either worked with or they've worked for me during my time on active duty in some capacity. True professionals by every sense of the word, and you are in for a treat as they go through and discuss this very important topic. I'm going to allow a little bit of rules of engagement. I'll allow each panelist to kind of give a short intro, talk how their duty position and what they do is relevant to today's subject matter, transformation and contact sustainment. Then we'll spend a majority of our time, I made this pretty clear to the guys having sat through a lot of these panels in the past, as many of them have, that we want to field your questions and hear, what you want to talk about, because I think that's probably one of the most important things. Our AUSA staff will be retrieving your handwritten questions during the panelist remarks. They'll pass those up to me, and I will divide them up accordingly. I think we also have the capability to go live and take oral questions as well, if we want to do that. So without further delay, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn it over to the CASCOM Commanding General, and also someone who I spent a lot of time with, very proud of her and what she's accomplished and the great work that she's doing. And Michelle, why don't you take it?
Sure, thanks, I appreciate that. So thank you as well to the AUSA staff. Thanks for the invitation to be here this morning. Thanks to General Mohan for kicking it off, and as well to his entire team that has orchestrated and sort of led us through some working groups over the past month for this panel. In addition to that, sir, thanks for being here. I volunteered yesterday to take all the hard questions, only because of the tremendous grief that I gave General Walker over about 3 years when he was down at AMC and I was up in the G8 and then down as the then CASCOM DCG for modernization. And the fact that I think there was a time in Afghanistan where I left you on a tarmac waiting for me to come pick you up. And so I figured at this point I should probably, I owe you one.
More than one occasion.
Yeah, right, exactly. So I'm here as well, although could I ask the AUSA team back there maybe just to lower the lights a little bit? We are being blinded here. One, because I wanted to look out and let you all know that I'm here with an incredible CASCOM team, our commandants, our Command Sergeant Major, our Chief Warrant Officer, our DCO, who's leaving here shortly for JMC. But when you see them, again, just a tremendous team that I have. I am blessed every single day to work with them. They exude excellence and they exude that technical, capacity to describe the problems that we have today. So if you see them out in the exhibit halls, please grab them, please talk to them, and please engage them. So at CASCOM, as you very well know, we train, we educate, and we develop sustainment professionals. We also integrate and modernize sustainment capabilities, and we also generate and synchronize and manage that sustainment force structure in support of LISCO and within our MDO environment. Many of you know I wear multiple hats. I wear I wear the CASCOM hat, which is most people don't always understand all the tremendous capabilities that we provide to the Army. I wear a Center of Excellence hat, and then I also wear that Force Modernization Proponent hat as well. And I have many bosses, and so that is a typical day in the life of a logistician. But we report to obviously multiple ACOMs and even up to the Joint Staff J4 as well for many of the things that we provide for the Joint Force. We are absolutely thinking differently about how we sustain the future Army. We are also trying to be a better customer. Last September we hosted a industry week, and we look forward to doing that again and continuing to describe the challenges that we have. We are also very transparent. I know many of you here in the audience over the past couple of years that I've worked in this space, and I try to be an open book. So please engage us and help us think differently. In addition to that, you heard General Hodney talk about yesterday how sustainment cuts across all of those functional aspects of the future Army warfighting concept. It also cuts across all of the SIFWE experimentation, and Shane's going to talk a little bit about that. And so I think the fact that we have a role in transformation and contact, and you're going to hear Chris talk about this here a little bit, but we also play from a Force Modernization Componency hat. We also play in the TIC space, in the deliberate transformation space, and in the concept-driven transformation space. And that is absolutely nested with our cross-functional team that Shane leads, but also with our CDID partners and with the entire AFC enterprise as a whole. What I'd like to do really quick for about 1 minute is show you a video of all the things that collectively the Sustainment Enterprise has been working on. So with that, to the team back there, please go ahead and cue this video. All right. So I look forward to, I'm going to pass this off to Chris here, but I look forward to talking a little bit more about the .mil-PF implications about what we're doing from a sustainment perspective. And so Chris, who has been a key partner as we look at the organizational changes that we're undertaking with the mobile VCTs, as well as the transformation to his formation. He's been a key partner, so as the 101st, and Amy Downing and Josh Porter, who is down on the southern border right now. But we couldn't do what we do from an acceleration of FDUs and all the work that we're doing from an organizational perspective without this vision that the chief has about transformation and contact. And so, Chris, over to you.
So thank you, ma'am. First of all, let's say thanks for everybody here allowing us to escape our hardship tour of Oahu to come here and visit everybody here in Alabama. It was a hard sell to come off the island and come here and visit everybody here. I'm Chris Johnson, I'm the commander of the 25th Division Sustainment Brigade, and we've been in this TIC 1.0 for going on almost a year now. We started off April last year when the chief came out and identified our 2nd Brigade of 25th Infantry as being a TIC brigade. And we moved out and reflagged and made that a prototype formation, all the way down and transforming that BSB into what we call a light sustainment battalion. And we had a culminating training event that went through what we call JPMRC, the Joint Pacific Multinational Range Complex there, that we executed the TIC formation with a world-class Op 4 team that came out from JRTC and put them and executed the essentially a CTC rotation over 3 different islands: the island of Oahu, the Big Island, and then the island of Palau. So immediately, once we got the fielded equipment that we had there in the division, we identified 2 key pieces of technology that the industry partners provided to us: the ISV, the infantry squad vehicle, which is probably the more sexy end of what we see an infantryman be able to move out, the ISV-9, and the solar stick. And as a sustainer, specifically to my DSSB formation, we figured out the ramifications, implications of what happens with the introduction of that ISV. We immediately saw a reduction across the board of Class 3 bulk consumption inside the formation. To give you kind of a touch point of that, our Alpha company only had to push into 2,700 gallons of gas through the entire duration of that formation and that fight because of the low consumption rate of the ISD they had to go into. So the actual organic bulk fuel capability that's resident inside that LSD was able to sustain that formation through about 15 days of force on force, to include RSONI, reverse RSONI, to lessen that burden that went into coming out of the Alpha company. The second part that we saw in there was a solar stick. You know, everybody's going out to a sustainment formation. You know, how does the Op 4 normally key in on a BSB or a BSA or DSA to hear the generators running at night? So we took our power generation capability, and we adopted a new concept of looking at power and energy as a day of supply. The solar stick went out and it was able to make us, or enable us, I should say, to reduce our generation power from running it 24 hours a day to to run about 6 hours a day. So that the generators were able to power up and recharge the solar stick, and we could go back and we could power a top. We could go back and recharge MRRs, LRRs, and SRR platforms that goes into that. Again, driving into the reduction of our overall fuel consumption, which then enabled the battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Jason Kappas, to go back and figure out how to fight his LSB in a more distributed, disparate formation. He was able to take his formation, break it down into 3 base clusters that were, aligned to 3 fighting rifle battalions, and move through the terrain there that was in Oahu. So we're pretty excited here to see what happens with TIC 2.0 as we flesh out, and then we start doing our 3rd Brigade, 325. They start making that transformation. I know the CSA has now made a decision that we will all now be mobile brigade combat teams. And as we start building that out and realizing how that's going to start working its way back into the sustainment formation, we alter all other formations to tailor that to provide a more reflexive and adaptable logistics enterprise, especially when we overlay it with the terrain that we've been charged to fight in across the Pacific region. So man, we're excited with all the things that Capstone can provide us in the larger Army enterprise as well.
Thanks, Chris. First of all, I want to second all the appreciation up here. We're all excited to be part of this panel. I'm truly excited to join the immense talent at these tables up here in front. Yours truly excluded, of course, and happy to represent industry in this conversation. Pete Johnson, the Vice President for Integrated Vehicles Business Development for GM Defense, and we've been supporting actively the transformation and contact efforts over this past year. Well, we did so through, obviously, the Army Program of Record with the Infantry Squad vehicle, but we also loaned, using our resources, additional variants and advanced technologies in hybrid propulsion, etc., to allow the Army the opportunity to see how they might benefit both operationally and in sustainment. I'll start also by acknowledging some of the dialogue that occurred here yesterday surrounding that while the nature of war has remained the same, the character is rapidly changing. And I would say when you take a look at the military-industry relationship, the nature of it has also remained the same, but the character of it also has to rapidly change and adapt in stride, because the whole purpose of that relationship is to deliver and provide capabilities at the right time and the right capabilities for the warfighter to defend this great nation. And to that end, I do think that General George, Chief Staff of the Army's vision for TIC has nailed it. I think that everything I hear also with regards to continuous transformation, the coaching from General Rainey and others on that is going to make a huge difference. The ability to rapidly experiment with the operating force, and that includes our great Army sustainers, and to leverage that and showcase your technology, your capabilities under the most difficult, challenging conditions against determined, well-trained enemy. Well, that's the soldier touch point of any industry's dream. It's a big deal. And if you have your technology and your capability go through and be wire brushed in that context, it can only get better. It can only be more resilient. And I would offer, I think it also will reduce future acquisition risk and ultimately make any open competition that the Army offers out there more useful. Industry doesn't avoid eye contact on competition. It's part of the American way of life. We thrive in that space. But I think the iterative and rapid, efforts and experimenting capabilities in the context that's been really ably laid out by Joe Donahue and Colonel Johnson here, I think will make huge dividends. I also think that the risk calculus in all of this is pace. And the G3 of the Army yesterday, informed us that we're behind. So I think that's the clarion call, a really solid clarion call for all of us to move out on this. So I look forward to sharing the experience of GM Defense in the transformation contact group this last year, where, as I said, we tried to showcase innovations and capabilities that we drew from commercial investments to make a difference for the Army. I look forward to the questions, and I'll be followed by Brigadier General Shane Upton.
Hey, good morning. First of all, I just want to say thanks to the leadership of AUSA, and really, as the one Futures Command member up here, the partnership between AMC, the Center of Excellence and Futures Command, and the units and our defense partners. That's why we're here. I mean, I was asked earlier, what do I get out of AUSA, and General Mohan said it, but I'll tell you, for us, it's that collective enterprise approach, and then looking at the industry partners out there in the audience, and then us handing you our problems, and you helping collectively to solve those. So that's how I'm gonna kind of frame this. It's good going near last, because I can pull on a bunch of threads. So what I want to talk about is the contested logistics cross-functional team's priorities. Some of you have heard this, but I want to tie them back to General Donahue and also Chris Johnson's comments, because they're living it and they're making it integrated into our formations, but why that's aligned. So the first thing we talk about, and I'm kind of paraphrase what General Hodney shared yesterday in the opening fireside chat. The first thing in the Army warfighting concept is C2 and counter C2. Well, in the logistics TIC formations, we have to, with industry, enable our formations like Chris's to maximize the use of data very rapidly and help them inform decisions at his level, at his division commander's level, and up to the Corps. I will tell you the CFT has primarily been focused with the enterprise at Corps and below, and our partners at AMC are above the Corps into the strategic base. But that's why the interrelationship of that relationship is so big. I'll talk later on about probably some stuff we've seen in recent stuff with use of data, but I want to emphasize a couple of things. One of the Army's premier efforts, and actually the Chief's #1 priority, is next generation command and control, and that's why I talk C2 first. General Donahue and I have had a lot of talk about that, and General Mohan mentioned the agility layer, or what we would call an application layer. You know, and Pete just mentioned a competition. We want you all, with your tools in the data space, to bring your tool to us in the sustainment enterprise and compete it. Compete it like we do in industry when you talk a consumption-based model. We'll put the app in that application layer. It'll help commanders see themselves better and have these data-driven tools, but we'll compete it. And it's like an app. My 13-year-old, again, TDY, I love that phrase, TDY to the digital age. That's me as well, not my 13-year-old. And if he doesn't like an app, he holds his screen, it hits a minus, and we go, and then that company that gets immediate feedback, man, we maybe need to fix this. So it's useful for our warfighters and our formations. The second piece of the warfighting concept, and there are really two functions, is expanded maneuver and cross-domain fires. And doing that, the log community and the TIC formation, and Chris mentioned some of the technologies, are looking at how do we do that autonomously paired with our crewed formations. The HMI concept, or human machine integrated, is not about replacing humans with machines, but it is thickening our capabilities. To give a commander like Chris or a formation to have the ability to resupply through normal crewed means, but also have, quite frankly, a line of communication that's autonomous, that doesn't need crew rest, just needs maintenance, and he has flexibility as a commander to move those assets very rapidly around. What I would ask as a problem statement or help from industry is, how do we control those collaborative behaviors? Because in the log community, and what we want to look at in TIC is how you do that in the ground, in the air, and also on sea. And General Donahue mentioned and showed a lot of the efforts in the video, and so did General Mohan mentioned in cargo UES and the watercraft. We need your help. We know cognitively our soldiers are very digitally savvy, but we need to know that they can control multiple systems in all three of those domains simultaneously, and they're going to have to, at the speed and pace. I'll give an example. Just recently, a Project Convergence capstone at the National Training Center, our partners in cross-domain fires, long-range precision fires, have got a weapon system now that we needed, and we absolutely have. It's an autonomous HIMARS. Double the pods of a normal HIMARS. It also has new munitions we're testing at the rate of fire is about 20 rockets in 20 seconds. That consumption rate is what we will need to be lethal,
That's what we get paid to do as an Army, is go fight and win our nation's war. Lethality is the forefront of that. But we also have to look at how we sustain that, and that's how we see that human-machine integrated piece, is thickening the ability of our distribution networks so they can continuously be moving. Chris missed a great thing on demand reduction, is what we call it in the CFT, of that fuel demand reduction, the power, and then I'll talk about both those kind of simultaneously. We have got to figure out solutions. So one, when we talk demand reduction, absolutely we're reducing the need for commodities. But also with industry partners, we're figuring out how to produce things like power that then we're not hauling tow generators around. We're not even hauling any generators around. The vehicle, I call them dual or tri-purpose systems. If I have a drone that lands and delivers a commodity to somebody in the 25th Infantry Division, it should also be able to offboard power into that formation and recharge it. And then it's gone. And then he comes back. We should have ground systems. We do. We're experimenting with them. General Donahue's led an effort with what we call the MMET trailer. It's not a trailer. It's a multi-purpose vehicle. But the big thing is it resupplies a formation, provides power, and actually now it's been so useful for TIC and sustainment potentially that we're seeing other warfighting functions and expanded maneuver multi-domain fires see a use case there. That's true convergence of synergy. The last one is kind of the advanced power space. We're talking about power generation more offensively. We're going to have a big power demand on the battlefield with some of the new weapon systems we're bringing into the inventory. Think the long-range hypersonics weapon and its radar system, potentially DE in the future, or even space-based weapons. That power demand is not going to reduce, it's going to go up, but we have to work with you and industry to figure out how we provide that power at point of need or where we need it strategically in different means. And I know there's a lot of companies out there in that space. So I'll leave the rest of my comments for that, but I just kind of wanted to frame that because the discussions previously and kind of exactly what we're working on in the CFT in those four main areas, but I'll turn it over to Aaron.
Thank you, and thank you to AUSA and AMC for graciously hosting us on this panel. So to take a step back, and I think going last has its privileges, as General Upton said, because I think build on General Mohan's comments here of how do we think about the structure of TIC, and from my perspective, which is from industry and companies like ours, and particularly from a software perspective, how does this help us go much faster today and accelerate how we can build capabilities together with the Army going into the future? I think the first learning for us, and I think from an industry perspective, is end users and being able to work with the actual end operational communities as you're deploying and developing a capability is the lifeblood of being able to successfully deploy software. As a company, from our perspective, every time where we have deviated from that pattern and we're not working directly with the end operational community as the capability is rapidly evolving, we've failed. It doesn't end up representing the actual patterns of how users need to use the tools don't end up being intuitive. You need that very tight collaboration with historically has either been born from a commander creating space for that collaboration, a crisis, or a conflict that forces that day-to-day iteration cycle and collaboration. And I think we're incredibly excited from an industry perspective that I think TIC is helping institutionalize and creating those spaces where you can take those calculated risks to enable very fast iteration, particularly for software capabilities, for how they can be improved and fielded within the Army. I think from our perspective as well, I think one of the things that's been tremendously helpful from an industry perspective in clarifying the TIC framework is it focuses on an outcome, not a process. And from our perspective, like across industry, we want competition aligned to outcomes that are going to deliver material capability into the force rapidly. And to have a structure that puts a timeline, sets a falsifiable set of criteria, I think forces very, very rapid evolution across industry partners. I think is fundamentally incredibly good for industry from a software perspective, and I think helps deliver capability faster into the Army. I think if you were to look at the software business, and you were to go back 5 years, I think we've had to go through a very similar transformation of how do we move from a relatively slow iteration cycle to one much faster. If I look at my time, at the current firm that I'm at, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we thought about releases on a monthly cadence maybe, where we could push new capability out to our customers. A few years ago, a week turned into a month. A month turned into a week turned into a day turned into 10 releases a day, and now we're at about 1,000 turns of the wrench of having to release capability daily on multiple networks in a way that's going to ensure stability across capability. We're not unique in industry in doing this, but this is, I think, a very common pattern of how do we sort of think about the traditional DoD OODA loop of having to run through an incredibly rapid cycle of observing something that can make a workflow better for a user and being able to effectively in real time adapt capability and see that pushed out to a production environment that to immediately deliver something better for the workflow. And I think finally, when we look at sort of the present state, I think what we've observed with TIC is that it's incredibly valuable to have sort of the permission space where there can be calculated and risk taken, both on industry's perspective and from the Army's perspective, to give a environment to really rapidly experiment, which is something that I think has been, hard for industry to cohesively and systematically find, not just with the Army, but across the DoD. And from in our current state, we see that as a massive, massive step forward in being able to test, deliver, and iterate on capability much faster and much cheaper than historically what might have already been possible. I think when we look to the future here, I was thinking about, the comments here with the team, and I wanted to sort of frame, if we were to think from our perspective, from industry, what are the coaching we'd sort of give ourselves if we want to think about continuing to accelerate and move faster here? And so I wanted to sort of play back a few comments that, sort of a discussion I was having with one of my teams as we were looking at a set of efforts that we actually have in another service, and how do we more rapidly take this type of environment to deliver capability. So one, and I think, General Mohan, I think, mentioned this in his comments, is decisions are the coin of the realm here, particularly decisions that are highly levered. And I think one of the good news about the Sustainment enterprise, it is full of incredibly valuable and impactful decisions for the Army. Decisions around where you procure, how do you position inventory, what inventory gets released, how do you orchestrate that with the underlying movement of units in C2 processes. And I think, when you look at the decision as a thing that is actually going to drive value from a piece of software into an actual operational environment, I think it becomes very, very clarifying that a lot of the things we've traditionally leaned on, whether they be dashboards, common operating pictures, different placemats, they're useful, they're pieces that we need along the journey, but they're not in end state. And if software capability is not actually driving, automating, and allowing us to make decisions in a differentiated and faster way, as industry, we're ultimately failing there, and we need to be held accountable for doing better. Second is, from our perspective, I think industry thrives on outcomes as opposed to having to work through process. And I think from our internal experience, when we look at even our own enterprise, whenever any of our leaders, or if I look at the teams that I get to work with, when we define process for how a team achieves an outcome, the outcome is typically strictly worse than allowing the team to track towards an outcome and figure out what the right way is to achieve that and ultimately take the hill that we're pointing towards. I think this fundamentally goes to that if we can align an outcome, it is much easier to increase competition, allow multiple different solutions to take different pathways to try and achieve a given outcome, and to ultimately move the iteration speed much, much faster to see if you can achieve a specific capability in service of a decision you're trying to drive. And finally, I think one of the, to wrap up the comments on my end, excited to get to the discussion, is one of the things I think that's very exciting about TIC for us is I think it's one of the first acknowledgments that software doesn't have an end state. We're not thinking about capabilities as programs where there's a static output of it. We're thinking about these as things that are capability that is useful in a moment for a time and that should be continuously evaluated and pushed, and where we need to be rigorously asking ourselves, is there a better way? And ultimately picking winners and losers and holding industry to account where if we're not delivering the best capability at the best cost, we need the flexibility to instantly be able to sunset and replace that thing. And so I think, when we look at what are the preconditions that I think from an industry perspective allow that to thrive is, one is if you're a commander in the Army, demand faster and unreasonable outcomes. I think the greatest progress we've seen in a way that's truly symbiotic across multiple industry partners is we have the government asking for outcomes on timelines that are impossible and do not work in the current constraints. It's the only way that it forces innovation, whether that be in the platforms that can work with the speed we can move at, or what the warfighter can do in a differentiated way. Second, to echo General Mohan's point, is competition is great here, and the more that we can look at as outcomes as modulars where capability can be highly pluggable, it's going to increase competition, which is fundamentally going to, I think from our perspective as industry, and it force us to come with our best and it force us to continue to iterate in service of better capability. And finally, I think to get back to the structure of TIC is enabling, whether it be at a unit level or a broader command structure, having ways that you can underwrite the risk in a smart and constrained way to enable innovation and experimentation, even if the outcome is saying we need to divest from this rapidly and this is not the right way to approach this given objective, is something that if we don't have that, it makes it impossible to allow the end operators to take risk and actually be able to iterate on the product in a way that is going to drive capability faster for the force. So excited for the discussion and excited to get to engage the other panelists. Thank you.
So thank you, Aaron. I appreciate it, and I appreciate all the panel trying to kind of stay within the parameters and just kind of entice your appetite to ask some questions. I've received from Alex 4 or 5 questions, which I'll divvy out to the panel, but I'll kick it off with a couple that I think are relevant based on both General Mohan's opening comments and his keynote, as well as some of the things that the panel's covered thus far. And I'll kick it off with Shane Upton. You talked a little bit about this, but General Mohan alluded to it. He gave several examples of initiatives the sustainment community was working on to support continuous transformation. Could you expand a little bit, because I know you didn't have a lot of time there, on maybe some lessons learned from PC5 here recently?
Oh, absolutely. Thanks, sir. I appreciate that. So we're just recently, and if you were in here yesterday, but if not, we executed what we call Project Capstone Convergence. It's a joint multinational experiment that the Army has run now 5 iterations for the last 5 years, and we do it phased. So the first phase we just completed was at the National Training Center at Fort Irwin. And what did we learn? And some pretty big learning was going on. The first thing we learned is in previous experiments, we had done the sustainment functions, quite frankly, on what I would call a stick sling. We did not do that this year. We executed it inside of the combat. They were doing a joint forcible entry, then an attack, and a defend, and everything we experimented with, from data to human machine integrated autonomous supply platforms, air and ground, and even to demand reduction technologies for fuel savings, energy production, was all inside of that combat thread. So what did we learn bigly? I'm gonna give you 2 that I thought we'd never learn, but I want industry to hear. The first thing is logisticians are gonna have to be adept, it's back to the training question, in operating in the electromagnetic spectrum. I'll give you a vignette that happened at Capstone. This is one of the things why you experiment and you kind of fail and learn. So we had a combined arms breach going on, very tactical maneuver, but was happening with multiple capability. We now are experimenting with how we fight. Counter UAS, high and long range precision fires at very high rates of fire, an autonomous breach. But when we did the sustainment, all those systems were up in the air and they're absolutely doing their autonomous collaborative behaviors in the EMS spectrum. And then we launched the resupply vehicle that got to a certain line in that EMS spectrum and it stopped and lost link because we had not learned fully that when we do those together, where the conflicts lie in that EMS spectrum. That's absolutely manageable, but I would offer a problem statement back to industry. Just like we dynamically reroute our communications, like if I pick my iPhone up, I come in here, maybe I'm on the Wi-Fi, I walk out the door back on 5G. We're gonna have to look at that in the EMS spectrum, how we bounce between different frequencies, and quite frankly, how we accomplish autonomy doing that. That's a huge thing. It was a big lesson learned, and we have absolutely. The second one, and I sent a note to General Donahue on this one, because her deputy SCS is a former aviator. I see some aviator friends out here. Is logisticians, sustainers, the enterprise are going to have to be very comfortable in airspace management meetings when we start flying UAS, which we will and we must. That's a big lesson. That'll absolutely be a teammate, and then General Donahue will lead that effort on how we train our force and leader develop, but we're going to have to do that now. And to quote General Ryan yesterday about TIC, we're going to have to figure that out now. You see it, you know, the language. I sat in several of the meetings, and it was educational to me. I would say those 2 big things. The things we've innovated that are more into the sustainment front of some of the audience out there. I see many of the most senior sustainers out there. I will tell you the first thing is data transfer into a software tool off of platform. So we pulled quite frankly, easily. You kind of make yourself look at it. I looked in the mirror as a logistician for 30 years, and why didn't we do this a lot quicker and a lot sooner and years ago? But we had an Abrams, a V-37, platoon of them in the box fighting, not sitting in a motor pool, not static, and we were pulling real-time ammo consumption, fuel consumption, and maintenance faults off of those, going up through a tactical network, coming back off a network ops center into tools that some of our partners in this room and stuff have developed and used that, what we call, General Mohan mentioned the agility layer, did that real time. What I give out to industry, especially some of those that make our systems and our wheeled systems, our ground combat systems, we need your help. We now know we can do this, but we need your partnership going forward on how we do those across your other systems and do that quickly. We thought that was kind of the coin of the realm. We had these graphical user interfaces, these agility layers, we could see ourselves with data, but we couldn't see it real time. And Chris lives in a world every day. If he has to take a log stat and it's at a certain line, our old way of doing things, by the time he gets it and starts doing the analysis of it, it's such stale data, it's almost not useful. But being able to see that real time and then to have that informed decisions, that's where we need your help. We've done it on one platform. I know many other platforms have that capability. And quite frankly, to your software comment, not one piece of hardware was added to that system to do that. It was software upgrades to certain communication systems. It was a short software upgrade to the CAN bus that was already on the platform. No hardware. So that's why when we talk about kind of another lesson learned is things like characteristics of need statements, not these long requirements documents, but giving industry a broader aperture to get an outcome and not solve an exquisite problem. Big learning out of Capstone. And sir, I know I'm rambling, but I'll stop there. I have a tendency to do that.
No, not at all. Maybe a little bit. No, I'm just kidding.
You know me too well.
Hey Shane, I'm just messing with you. Michelle wanted to kind of add on based on a comment, some of your comments, and then I want to follow up with kind of how you concluded, but go ahead.
Sure, thanks. So just to pull a little bit on Shane's thread there. So we were out there together, although he had a much more of an extended duration stay than I did. But I think what was so Shane touched upon absolutely the EMS piece of that, the airspace. We looked at a couple of the decision aids that were inside of that, in theory, that sustainment application layer that would be part of the next gen C2 space. And the integration of some of those tools, though, into those sustainment tools, I think is also critical, right? So as you look at dynamic route, changes that a unit would have to make, how do you already have those tools baked into that, sort of that software package, so to speak? The other piece of it, and we, Shane and I have the opportunity here later this week to sit down with Joe Rainey and to pull the thread on HMI and power for about 4 hours. Really excited about this. And to me, it's about the care and feeding of robots. You think about the mule skinners of the old day, but this notion that I have a forward line of robots out there. And so what I saw out there was where you delivered one, we, in theory, we have a system, we didn't drop it just because of some drop procedures there, but we have the ability now to essentially drop a robot, autonomously cut it off from the secure holds from that platform and allow it to go and do its mission. But then if I needed to go and do a follow-on mission, I now have to have a human there to recover it, to rearm it, to refuel it, and to fix it. And so how do you think about, and we had a couple of really good conversations with some of the vendors out there about how do you then autonomously then, whether it's connected back to a PLS flat rack, along with that autonomous vehicle that we already have to make it completely autonomous. So I think it's just the care and feeding a robot, so we can't forget. We had a conversation about the maintainability. And so I think where we've tripped ourselves up in the past is we make our equipment, especially when we go to upgrades, very difficult for our maintainers to get actually at the systems. And so in this case, this was part of our MF trailer. And as you start to bolt on different payloads, or you bolt on autonomy kits, or you bolt on additional power, how do you make sure that you have enough space inside of that trailer platform to be able to do that, to make it really easy on our sustainers? So those are just a couple other things that I noticed out there, and I think I'm gonna go on to, no? Okay.
No, before you do, we'll get to the audience, a couple of the cards that I was giving the panel members time to digest the question. But yesterday, kind of dovetailing on your final point and a little bit about what Michelle said, Shane, yesterday in the Agile Acquisition for Continuous Transformation panel, I want to give our industry reps an opportunity here. The question was kind of asked, you know, what's the most important aspect of making continuous transformation work with our industry partners in an agile acquisition environment? And this term agility, General Mohan used it when he was talking about it, the importance of it. From both of your perspectives, and you kind of touched on your opening comments, but just real pointed and real brief from an industry perspective, you know, what do you think the most important aspects are there? Neil Thorogood, good friend of mine, was on that panel, and you know his response was without hesitation, 100% engagement and transparency, coupled with absolute trust. I just wondered from your perspectives what you thought about that. Pete, we'll start with you. Just be.
Yeah, I think Neil said it very well. I mean, agility's got to be on both sides. But also, I think one of the things that in that whole framework that's going to help enable transformation contact is where industry has leaned forward already, where industry has already accepted some risk, right? And so the idea that you don't wait for the requirement, you may not even wait for the characteristic of needs that's come out there, but you're transparently engaged with, industry, with the Army in a way that you're starting to understand the problem sets. You're starting to understand the challenges. And then you look inward and you try to draw and see where innovations, in our case, we look to the commercial sector and see where innovations are there that we can bring in very quickly, agilely, right? Because the maturity of the technology might be there, the application to the military context might just be what needs to be worked. And I think that agile in action as well. So when the Army picks up the phone and calls and says, "Hey, look, I need this here now," it's agility in motion. So that was, our experience for sure.
Thanks, Pete. Aaron, anything? I know you talked a little about it in your comments, but anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think two specific points here. I think it was said earlier, but requirements documents not being outcome documents. And I think when we see or industry sees programs where there's an incredibly detailed requirements that document that prescribes the approach as opposed to the outcome, I think that is often leaves industry and Army in a strictly worse place. One example, we were talking to another industry partner, and there's a major Army program, requirements have been in the works for multiple years. Bid on that program, they got disqualified from the program because they articulated how they could use AI as a tool for automation instead of business processes. The reason for the rejection was saying, well, the requirements document was written before these AI models existed, so you can't use technology that wasn't conceived as part of the requirement. Even though that's going to save money for the vendor, it's going to save money for the Army and lead to a strictly better outcome. I think to piggyback off it, how do you have venues like TIC that can be sort of a pre-acquisition forum to actually prove that technology works? So many of the technologies that I think can have an impact in the short run are not things, to Shane's point, that require massively new hardware. It might be zero hardware. The cost of experimentation is exceptionally low. So how do we find ways that we can really rapidly, between industry and Army, move jointly to see if there's a proof point there, can a capability deliver value today? And if so, then make the acquisition approach the second question, not the first question.
Thanks, Aaron. I appreciate that. So now we've got a couple of cards up here. I think the panelists have had time to. I'm going to start with Chris. He had a question from the audience based on his opening. Go ahead, Chris.
Yes, sir. The question was discuss further detail about fuel reduction, power generation there in relation to our brigade that went to the JPMRC. So 2nd Brigade went out to the field for JPMRC with 95 ISVs. That offset the 95 Humvees that we had to go out and use for troop transport and actual maneuver on the battlefield. So what we saw is, the ISV is a modern vehicle. It's based off of a civilian truck design. Compared to the 1980s design of a Humvee and that engine that sits in there that this drinks diesel fuel like a college kid on spring break. But at the end of the day, the ISVs sip on gas. We look at, I told you, we send out 2,700 gallons from our Alpha Company push out to. The previous year, the Alpha Company with a 3rd Brigade, we went to that fight with a traditional fleet. We pushed over 45,000 gallons of gas to backfill their organic hold bulk fuel capacity there. So we're seeing the realization of technology, not just technology, as we kind of look at the Army, we're seeing the industry partner finding modern technology, modern combustion engine. They put it into an Army platform. We take it out to the field and we look at it and we lessen the demands on the sustainment enterprise. And you're like, well, what's the big deal in having to push less gas? Well, we look at our fight through a lens of fighting in the Pacific. And we look at it through a lens of fighting in places like the Philippines, some other islands that we won't mention here. And so whenever I can take a large outside HEMIC fueler off the road and not have to navigate terrain, constricted roadways, low overhang, congested mega cities potentially as we look at that, that makes our job easier. It lessens the burden on the enterprise, and it takes risk off our soldiers. It takes risk off the civilian populations that we may be working within and around. Back to the power generation piece, we've all been to that BSA that's got the generators running, 24/7. We all know we're supposed to take them offline, run them for about 24 hours, for 20 hours, bring them down, do the maintenance, replace oil, but we all know we probably don't do that as often, right? We probably run them for about 21 and a half hours, 22 hours, bring them down, top them off. But the solar stick enabled us to just run a generator for 6 hours. So if you think about, I guess the best civilian application I can think about, we see kids walk around here with these power bricks that they use to run their cell phones. But think about that on an industrial scale, or think about that in a military application where I could take a generator, power up power bank, turn the generator off, and run my top off that power bank. Now I'm quiet, I'm smaller, I can take my top now and divide it in a couple different formations, which increases my survivability. I don't have a targetable footprint on the ground. We've all seen the videos of what's happening in Ukraine now. We had a briefing last week from some NGOs here. If CPs are operating now 40 to 45 kilometers behind where the formations are fighting. So think about if I could take my top and maybe get a little bit closer to where my soldiers are fighting, or I'm doing some distribution capabilities, and I can get quieter and I can run a generator. That's what that power generation capability gives at me. And I'm going to run my generator for just 6 hours, which now I'm not burning up my generators, I'm not increasing fuel, I'm not increasing the demand on my mechanics to make that happen for me. So overall, it's a big win, and just what we saw, probably what industry partners just kind of figured out, and then they handed it to us, and we figured out. The last part of this question is, how are we applying it to our formation? Our 2nd Brigade is inside the Philippines right now. They moved out about 2 weeks ago, and they're going to operate inside that environment for about 90 to 120 days through a series of exercises. The vessels just arrived the last vessel arrived on the 29th of March. They'll deliver our X-Labs, our exportable additive manufacturing capability there. To go back and talk about what General Mohan was talking this morning. We call it Lightning Labs and Mars Innovation Center. How we go back and figure out how to make small UAS. All that stuff is going into the Philippines right now. And we will put that through that crucible of that environment of what we think about, how we're going to fight in the future. We learned a lot of things. We get briefings on how a particular component is supposed to operate. Then we take it over to the Philippines where it rains, 19 out of 24 hours. It's 80, 90, 100% humidity, and it's probably the 2nd hottest place I've ever been on this earth outside of the Middle East. And we come back and provide feedback to our industry partners to improve that capability. So at the point of need, if we ever do get into that fighting match, we've made that improvement, and we've got a piece of technology that actually works.
Go ahead, Pete.
Yeah, Donnie. And Chris, just think, and Shane spoke to this a little bit in his introduction, but think now of that power bank that was allowed you to, turn off your generator and rest a little bit. What if that power bank was an integral part of your mobility platform? And what if you're able to replace your generators, replace your trailers that haul your generators, more optimally organized the prime movers, and in some cases now are just aligned to move generators around the battlefield. And so there's an efficiency out there, and that's sort of the hybrid technology that I think the Army's now starting to open eyes to and understand. We delivered 2 of those platforms over to 3rd Brigade 10th Mountain Division as part of the transformation contact effort, as part of Combined Resolve in Germany this past winter. And again, it was the agility, right, demonstrated, I think anyways, George, asking in October, can you do this in January in tough, rugged, conditions where your prototypes and your prototyping is going to be exposed, right? To all the vulnerabilities are going to come out for sure. And so anyways, that's there. That's another viable alternative for us to think through. Because I do think in final evaluation of generators, they're just not right for the time now. There's a much better play.
Thanks, Pete. Good additional comments for sure. So I think next I'll turn it over to Michelle. We had a question from also another one of my mentors, an excellent question from General Retired Ed.
Although I think, he just left.
Ah, he left you.
But I'll ask, but sir, so basically.
Oh, we're not going to do his question.
Well, if you, well,
Go ahead.
I will pull, it's recorded. I will pull, because I think Chris mentioned a little bit, so he talks about here, from a tyranny of distance in austere contingency environments, how do you solve that last tactical mile to deliver critical logistics to our joint warfighter? And I think, Chris talked a little bit about, what the 25th is doing right now, and Pete did too, right? And so, I always think, and I didn't coin this, but data is our new ammunition, and energy is our new firearm. And so if you think through that, and just from a hybrid perspective, from a demand reduction, we're going to pull this thread for General Rainey on Friday, where that, and when you walk a gallon of gas all the way back to that theater base, where we think about who's delivering, and those are our Compo 2 and 3 teammates for a lot of our bulk and tactical distribution of fuel. Right? We have very, very limited capability still in active duty to do that job. And so those are, and we're right now modernizing tankers to, because they are so old. But when you walk that back, that's about 15 companies. And I know that we talked about thickening the forward lines and not looking at, but that's about reinvesting force structure and dollars into other higher Army priorities. And that's a lot of money. It's a lot of people associated as well, where you can think differently about what that capability provides. And so when you think, I'm all about demand reduction. I'm all about the hybridization of our vehicle fleets. We saw that in Europe. We've also seen that though. I was even out at the National Training Center earlier in February timeframe. And when you think about our comms, our legacy comms structure, we're going to think differently about next gen C2 and even the C2 fixed architecture as well is thinking differently. But when you look at a legacy JNN or an SVT, and you've got like 4 or 5 generators surrounding it, and so Chris talked about what do you do when that comes off the battlefield, and how do you make your mobile CPs or your CPs much more mobile to withstand the threat that we have absolutely seen from Ukraine, and how those formations are targeted. So to me, it's about thinking differently about the ecosystem. General Hadi mentioned this yesterday about the opportunities to think about energy. I was just up at an operational energy summit a couple of weeks ago, and there's a company out there that's going to put satellites into space for space power beaming next year. You think about what that means for just our ecosystem of whether it's UASs out there, whether it's eliminating all of our our conformable wearable batteries that we have out there. We have almost 4,300 types of batteries, right? But so how do you think differently? We can't sustain that. And so when you think about the last tactical mile, it's thinking differently with DARPA. It's thinking differently about. I actually have another follow-up question there, just about Class 1 even, right? About what do you do about proteins in the environment, about manufacturing food, manufacturing parts, all those things. If we could be sustainers that basically eliminated our jobs on the battlefield, I'd be okay with that if you enabled those warfighters to be able to sustain and drive their own readiness and fight and win our nation's wars.
Another part of that efficiency, and you say you pull that gallon and it gets you 15 companies that you can reinvest for other things. It also speaks very directly to what General Kerry was talking about yesterday. The infantry commandant, and he sees the squad as a system. He's looking at that micro tactical level, but it also speaks to the soldier's load. The Army has a great chart that shows the weight, amount of battery weight that's in a platoon, infantry platoon, from Desert Shield, Desert Storm to the present. 48 pounds in Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and now it's over 1,100 pounds of batteries. in the IVAS platoon. That's not sustainable. That's not sustainable for the soldier's load, and it's not sustainable for the recharge and supply of battery requirements that are required. So pulling the thread on the mountain of batteries as well, I think, is equally important. But if you can find better and more efficient ways to deliver energy all the way down to the squad as a system, you'll make a huge outcome as well.
Okay, our next question over to Shane.
Hey,
Go
sir.
ahead and read, make sure you read the question.
I will. So the question is, central to the success of TIC and sustainment is the ability of all stakeholders to access relevant data. However, we are all challenged with being confident in its accuracy. How can we all help to improve data integration and accuracy to drive decisions and support enduring and modernized weapon systems? So I'll tackle this, and then I think I'm going to go right to my two teammates in industry. But from the perspective of Futures Command, I'm going to go back to Next Gen C2. So you asked data relevancy. I'll tell you, just a year ago, and this is just speaking for myself and the cross-functional teammates here in Futures Command, looking at things like data-driven decisions in the sustainment realm. We're like, hey, we gotta clean this data, we gotta do this. The technology is there to clean it for us. So now you ask the question of how to get access to it. Well, I'll tell you right now, the Next Gen C2 team, I'm gonna give Major General Pat Ellis, I can't believe I'm doing this. No, he's a great teammate. I'm giving him a shameless plug. I've got a QR code that will tell industry partners if you have an application and you want some access to the data. General Donahue mentioned it. You scan that, it'll give you your APIs, some of the code language you need to be, and we'll ingest it into the experimental prototype of Next Gen C2 and let you have access as we get that. We'll work with you. I say that's a leap forward we've taken in the last 12 months to have that. So what to the cleanliness of data? The integration layer, the AI tools are doing, it's ingesting data, whether it was human created, somebody called it on a radio, where we have AI tools now that will talk to text to clean that data into an end user. I mentioned the PL experiment with the tank. That's how we're cleaning data as well. The system's giving us. I sat with probably one of the best soldiers I've seen in a long time and really knew a lot about his system. That's why our soldiers are so great at that. He could fight that tank like nobody's business. And I asked him, I said, have you had to key a mic or do anything to pass this data? He said, no, sir. Fought the tank, I'm an Op 4, so we're trying to wreak havoc on the forces out here in the experiment. And all I see is a little banded message. It goes out, and then I get a response back from it on my command screen there. And it's a C2 fix effort. It's called Mounted Mission Command, but C2 Next will be that. But that piece of it. I think that's how we do it. If to answer that, you will have access. You'll have access. I know that's a question I've heard over and over again. How do I get access to the data? Well, first we need you to come along with your tool. We'll get you into Next Gen C2's prototype. That's pretty much the fastest pathway. So you can then see how to work in that agility layer and have it. Because that integration layer they're doing in Next Gen C2 is allowing data to now, which industry has led us to this. We come slowly sometimes, to go up and down. For example, let's give a real quick vignette and then I'll pass it off to Aaron and General Johnson. For years, we've had separate common operating pictures in the sustainment function. And then we kind of swivel chair, we call it, and we look at the intel teammates and our ops teammates, and we run back to a corner of a TOC or a trailer and bang away. Now with this application, you just literally through that data integration layer, lay the enemy picture right over your sustainment picture. Lay the maneuver fight, literally, and then also have the ability, like Eric would have, or Chris would have the ability to telestrate right over the top of that and say, here's where we've distributed the BSA to be survivable, but it's here, 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 as you're talking real time over that. See, the data access, I think we've made some leap forward. So as industry partners, you can see me after this. I'd rather direct you to Pat Ellis, another joke. You'll see him, beat him up. He probably has already left, but I'll turn it over to Aaron just kind of for some thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think a few quick threads here. I think one of the challenges we often see is we treat our sustainment systems like business systems, not warfighting systems. And I think, to Shane's point, that is decoupled the point at which data is actually operationally useful, where it's being generated from how it's being collected and encoded, which causes inaccuracy, it causes lags. And I think the strategy to get after this, it's yes, all of the above. It's going to be multifaceted, and there's not going to be one silver bullet. It's going to be laying little pieces of software and CAN buses, which for commercial autos, like you can do this without any new hardware, and we've been able to do it for about the past 15 years. It's easy, quick, and simple to do to start to bring those endpoints online. It's turning manual processes and just having apps that can collect that information and feel it, feed it in real time. Into, as General Mohan said, that agility layer, and it's adding passive sensors, all different types of sensing. None of these are mutually exclusive. They're going to be different in every theater. They're going to be different in every unit, and that's okay. You can cohere it into one integrated environment. But I think you need to really focus on how do you actually get the point of collection of that data to the operationally relevant place for what you actually need to be able to see. The second challenge here, I think, is the number of endpoints you have to ship software to are exploding. And I think a lot of the old processes of how do you manually move software and get it to run and get it to upgrade just break as you start to have to like expand the footprint for something like NGC2, or if you think about the future state where you have thousands of UAS systems, you have thousands of fat-billion devices that are now endpoints, you have tens of thousands of mobile devices that are now endpoints, and you're going to have to be able to, multiple times a day, install new software on all those devices across multiple networks. And I think one of the things we've seen in industry is, if you're a software company, internally this is sort of a solved problem for you. You've basically built a system, it's highly automated, that allows you to do this across scale, across network, and to be able to push multiple variations of code in a fully automated way that can comply to all your InfoSec processes and do that thousands of times a day across millions of different endpoints. That's a core competency, and I think this is a place where we're seeing the Army take massive strides here, but we're not there yet, and particularly in the sustainment domain. We're going to need sort of to move by a few orders of magnitude, both in the speed and the diversity of endpoints that you need to be able to ship software to. And then, sorry, I'm blanking on the third piece that I had here, so pause there, but yeah, being able to...
Pete, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I'll come at it a little different way. I think the access to data is both ways, right? So I think, certainly the stakeholders in industry have an interest in getting access to data so they can help, move their product solutions forward. But the Army government also has a desire to get industry data to confirm, validate, understand how well is the capability really performing. And so it is a two-way street. And I do think that both the government and the industry has to open up. As we supported the effort in Germany this past January, one of the things that the Army really needed to understand the capability that we had on the table there. And one of the ways they wanted to understand that is the data that is inherently baked in to the vehicle. Modern vehicles have a tremendous amount of diagnostic data, et cetera, that is available. But commercial industry protects that as much as the government protects its own interest in data. But we were able to again, through trust and transparency, we opened the gates of all of that data so that the Army Test Evaluation Command, who had the responsibility kind of as the objective partner in the effort to kind of get the objective readout of the experiment itself, we provided it to them directly, not pre-analyzed, not kind of tapered in any way, but here's SIM card right from vehicle, here's yours, go take a look at it, we'll evaluate it, and then let's come together and take a look at the results. I mean, it's got to go both ways.
Excellent. Are there any oral questions from the audience? I know they had some microphones floating around. I just want to be sure that we've covered all the bases. I think we have one right back here. Alex? Just if you would, state your name, who your question's for, and then the question, please.
Thank you. Ken Kreitzer, Canvas Media in New York. Just a question. I wanted to follow up with Major General Donahue about your comment about space-powered beaming. First time I've heard about that. Could you provide a level of detail on what that is about? Thank you.
Have you see me afterwards, and I'll give you the link to the company on LinkedIn, and you can take a look at what they're doing. Yes, so I'd heard about this technology for actually a couple of years. Transcom actually was taking a look at this, and I think it was the first time I'd actually heard a CEO, declare right next year, here this fall actually, that he's going to launch a satellite out there, and he is incredibly. He believes the tech's going to work, and so I think it just, this is, and by the way, it's got he also has he's got a lot of private industry investment, but he also has a DoD OSD grant to be able to do this because of the tremendous capability that it could provide us. I will also tell you that, from an installation perspective too, but also potentially, there's a lot of investment in nuclear as well, and there's a lot of initiative behind that. And so again, we're looking, as General Hodge mentioned yesterday, energy as an ecosystem. It is important for us to think about all types of energy sources. We don't think it's just one, but I think there's a multitude of partners that we should be, thinking through those critical, hard problems, that last tactical mile that's out there, especially when you think about the Indo-Pacific. So, by the way, a shameless plug real quick for, I didn't talk about from just last tactical mile piece, and Shane mentioned a little bit of the autonomous resupply vessel and the partnering there. General Mohan mentioned this as well, with an autonomous, basically UAS that can lift the capacity to resupply those hard to reach warfighters in the Indo-Pacific. But a shameless plug for our Warriors Corner watercraft panel led by our Chief of Transportation and some of our teammates, to include our CFT as well later, and that also gets after that.
Thanks, Michelle. Appreciate the question, sir. We have time for just one more question, and then I'll wrap it up. Go ahead.
Good morning, team. I'm Chief Mitchell from Japan. I'm a food advisor. I know that we talked some about autonomous and robotics and sustainment. I would like your thoughts on any type of leverage for industry partnerships for that same model with food service. I think that we have some cuts in our 92 Golfs coming up soon, and the ability to kind of leverage robotics, I think, as a tick field feeding company would be great. Thank you.
As long as it doesn't, have us end up eating T-Rats, I'm all in.
Well, the chief brings up a good point before I let Michelle or Shane, either one, just real quickly respond. As force structure, and I think General Mohan kind of alluded to this, but some of the challenges as we move forward with future reductions in force structure. 92 Golf's very, very good example. We've been fighting that for years, and unfortunately continued to lose that battle. But that's just one example of where something like robotics or other initiatives could replace that capability. So go ahead, Michelle.
All right, Rapid. That was yesterday's Rapid. So, as the quartermaster commandant back a couple years ago, and will be forever blamed for the reduction of 92 Golf cuts out there. But you've got to think differently. We have to think differently, right? So if you look at Ukraine right now, I'm not putting a CK up in the at the forward line of troops to feed soldiers, as I used to always say about. This is my sarcastic side, but back at NTC, when I would show up at the BSA and I'd see a sign, it was like, we're serving chicken and waffles today, right? We're not doing chicken and waffles anymore, right? So we have to think about what does that mean from an austerity perspective with AKs, integration of AKs onto combat platforms, but it's also thinking, and we have a lot of partnerships up with Natick Soldier Center. I know John Cushing's here in the room with us today, but thinking about just different rations, right? And how do we ensure that we get the sustenance to the soldier to ensure that they are well fed and they can go and do their mission. So I would say, and again, partnerships with DARPA, we're thinking about this. We're thinking about this with OSD, R&E. So we have a lot of initiatives out there to get after this from a class 1 perspective.
Okay, I appreciate it. I think our time, I'm getting the hook, is up. But so team, I really appreciate you all participating, everyone in the audience. Great questions. No doubt we could go on for several hours on this important topic. What I hope you all walk away with today, though, is a couple things. Continuing transformation and sustainment, something near and dear to my heart, obviously, is vital for the future success of our combat forces. I think that goes without saying, and no one in this room would disagree. And coupled with the fact, and secondly, the emerging technologies that DoD and industry can leverage to improve tick sustainment is absolutely paramount. We've talked about it. You heard every panel member alluded to it. I even threw the softball question. General Mohan certainly alluded to it in his comments. The importance of industry and having that agility that we talked about is absolutely paramount. So how about joining me in one final big round of applause for our panel?
Well, thanks, General Walker. Thanks to a great panel. We're going to take a 45-minute break. Be back at 11:15 for our next panel, training, institutional training and transformation. So thanks.
Thank you.